How the wrists move throughout the golf swing could be one of the most important topics to ever truly understand if you want to master quality contact and ball control. Today's video is going to use the HackMotion wrist sensor and talk you through the movement of the lead wrist from setup through backswing, transition, downswing, impact and follow through. I'll give you some guidelines and checkpoints to look for if you're training with HackMotion, and even if you're not training with HackMotion, to understand the feels and the positions that this lead wrist should look to get to throughout the entire swing. It's pretty standard 6-iron shot for me there. Very slight draw or even a slight overdraw in that occasion. I want to talk you through the way I do that and the feels I have in my wrist throughout the swing, the checkpoints that you need to look for if you want to maximize the efficiency of your ball striking, the quality and the consistency of your contact while hitting the ball far and controlling the direction as best as you can. When it comes to the lead wrist, that's going to be the wrist that we focus on primarily today, because this is the one that HackMotion is going to measure most accurately with the Core, Plus and Pro models. You're going to be able to get lead wrist data with all of those three options with the HackMotion. So we're going to focus on the lead wrist for today's video. At setup, we're going to see that there should be a small amount of extension. Extension is the movement of the wrist in this condition or in this fashion where the wrist bends backwards and there's an angle here between the forearm and the back of the palm. This is lead wrist extension. And the opposite of that is lead wrist flexion, where the palm now moves up towards me and the back of the wrist is now flexed. Bowed is another description you'd often hear for this condition. Because of how we grip the golf club, and with the way the hand's positioned on the club, there's a small amount of extension in my grip. My grip's relatively neutral, as described by most golf instruction books. You'd see that the grip that I display on the club is quite neutral, and in doing so I have around 11-12 degrees of extension there. And in fact, the last shot I hit, I actually had 8 degrees of extension at setup. Now, the number you have will depend on your grip type. So this number isn't set in stone, but if you're much further away from a number somewhere between 5 to 20 degrees of extension, then you may want to take a look at your grip, because it could well be the fact that your poor grip is leading to your poor club control. So somewhere between 5 to 20 degrees of extension in the lead wrist at setup would be a great place to start. The first checkpoint to take a look at is where the club reaches parallel to the ground in the takeaway. And just in that very small space and time of the swing, the lead wrist has gone from having a small amount of extension in it to being basically flat already. So there's some wrist movement going on immediately in the takeaway. Even though they might talk about a one-piece takeaway, and even though your feeling might be to keep everything connected in this first part of the swing and keep things fairly stable, the truth is that this lead wrist is already beginning to start moving into some flexion, towards flexion, or being slightly flatter than it was at setup. That's going to benefit you in many ways, one of which is to start keeping this club face turned down slightly towards the ground. A strong position of the club face equals a lot more strong positions throughout the rest of the swing, meaning your body can react to a club face that's in the right place. So by the time you reach shaft parallel to the ground, your lead wrist, the back of your forearm, and the lead wrist, the back of your hand, should be pretty close to flat. HackMotion here is measuring this around 1 degree of flex, pretty much dead flat. And as I keep going to the top, I'm going to maintain that flat condition in my wrist. Anything here around 0 degrees of flexion or extension, almost a flat wrist, would be desirable. That would be a neutral condition. One thing that you want to avoid, especially if you're measuring with HackMotion, you'll be able to see this, you'll be able to feel it, you'll be able to watch it on the screen. The last thing you want to do is take this slight extension number at setup, which in this condition, on this example, is 13 degrees, and you do not want to add that extension. You do not want to add to that extension. That's 29 degrees of extension now. That's gone from 13 in the backswing, 13 at setup, to 29, 27 in the backswing. No one does that who's any good. Every golfer who's any good moves the wrist towards some degree of flexion. Some do it more than others, but you want to make sure that you're reducing the extension in your backswing. You want that wrist to go from a slightly cupped condition to being somewhere closer to flat by the time you're at the top. And in order to do that, you may well need to feel a conscious twisting or rotation of the shaft. I say to every single student who's training wrist angles at any point in time that you are already twisting this golf club. You're putting a force into this club every single time you swing it. You don't necessarily think about it in that way. You don't think about it as a twist because what you're doing is very familiar to you. So you just think about it as you swinging the club. But many of you will have trained yourselves to twist this club in a very inefficient way. It's the reason that you're struggling. So in order to change the pattern, it's quite possible that you'll need to feel a very conscious twisting, rotating of the hands and the wrists and the shaft of the golf club to achieve this flat condition here where the club's parallel to the ground. Maintain that parallel to the ground feel at the top, and we've made it to the top of the backswing in a very strong condition. The club's in a great spot here where we've got lead wrist flat and we've managed to keep the club face in a very stable, very neutral condition. Having reached the top of the backswing, this is actually the part where the vast majority of golfers start to get it wrong. As you pull the club back down towards the ball, and this is the point in time where, if you think about it, you're pulling and putting the maximum force or energy through this handle. You're changing direction of the club and you're pulling on this thing to start to swing it back towards the ball. The energy that you put into the grip, the direction that you put that force, and the way that you move these wrists at this point in time is pretty much the most crucial element of the swing. As I say, this is where most of you start to get it wrong. Getting it wrong specifically means moving it from this nice flat condition. There we have 4 degrees of flex. The left wrist is pretty much dead flat. As you pull on this club to try and put energy and speed into the club, you pull in a very incorrect way, a very specifically incorrect way. You start to twist the shaft and the wrist into extension. The wrist moves back into that extended condition. So as I'm coming down, I've got the wrist extended, which is opening the club face. The moment you do that, all bets are off. There's no rhyme or reason now to what's going to happen down at impact. Of course, you could find yourself saving the shot through some timing, practicing this enough, you'll be able to organize some of the pieces of your swing to hit some functional golf shots. But there's zero chance of you being consistent with this extended condition in the downswing. So if you're going to focus on an area of the swing to strengthen the wrist angles and to keep an improvement, this would be maintaining the flat nature of that lead wrist coming down. Look at the numbers on the screen as I do that exercise. I've got 4 degrees of flex at the top, coming down, coming down, coming down, coming down, still 4 degrees, still 4 degrees. I'm maintaining the flat nature of that wrist, which is managing the club face. Doesn't get any more stable than that. That's a stable wrist condition, which ultimately leads to a more stable club face. And that stability leads to predictability as far as contact's concerned and how you control the curve of your ball. So if you're struggling with directional control, the likelihood is that your wrist angles in transition are getting very out of whack. They're being moved in the wrong place. You don't know that unless you're measuring it for sure or taking a lesson with someone who understands what they're doing. But I would highly encourage you to think about keeping that lead wrist flat at the top. There's 2 degrees of flex right there. And then moving the club down and trying to keep that wrist somewhat the same amount of flex down to this point. Now, once we've reached shaft parallel with the ground, we can go ahead and get into impact. Impact is going to have the lead wrist maintaining and adding, if anything, some of this flexion by the time we reach the ball. So this is a very specific difference between setup and impact. If you remember at setup, we had a small amount of extension in the wrist, a little bit of bend. There's 16 degrees, 15 degrees. When I go ahead and demonstrate the correct flat wrist condition coming down and then the wrist at impact with the shaft leaning forward, I now have 6 degrees of flex. So that's something like 15 degrees of extension, somewhere towards 8 degrees of flex. So extension, slight cupping, flexion, shaft forward. Extension, flexion. When you hit the ball, you want to have more flexion than you had at setup. That's the shaft lean that you're all looking for. So you want the handle of the club to be ahead and the lead wrist to still show this flat condition. The lead arm, the back of the forearm, the back of the hand are in a straight line. Now for some of you, in order to feel this, you'll actually need to exaggerate that. You'll need to push the handle even more forward. This here is demonstrating, as I do the pushing forward, 15 degrees of flex in that lead wrist. That's a lot, okay? That's a lot of lead wrist flexion. But if I feel that in my practice, I'm probably going to be able to deliver something closer to what I want at impact. But remember, there's more flex of the lead wrist at impact than there was at setup. Quick question for you. Did you know that 80% of your golf ball's direction comes from the club face angle at impact? And it's your wrists that control that angle. If you want to hit straighter shots and add more distance to your game, then check out the link in the description below. And in many ways, down at the ball and down at impact into the follow through is really the hardest part of the swing to manage the wrists. Everything is happening so quickly, it can be very difficult to know what's going on, impossible even to be able to feel it for yourself, which is why it's so important that you're measuring the wrists using a device like HackMotion. It really is a game changer for anybody looking to understand what goes on down at the wrist level. When it comes to the follow through, as I've said, for many of you, the follow through happens without even thinking about it. It's just a point in time that just occurs while you're hitting the ball. Have very little thought or knowledge as to what goes on here. The truth of the matter is, in good swings, I mentioned that the shaft is forward at impact, which involves the lead wrist being more flexed than it was at setup. But although the lead wrist is more flexed, at this point in time, it's already beginning to move slightly into a more extended condition. So the club's beginning to just overtake the hands and the lead arm. Managing how quickly that happens for most of you will be the most important thing, meaning that the worst golfers have the extension happen far too quickly after impact. The wrist breaks down, often the arms break down, shortening the radius of the swing, affecting contact, distance, and direction. So how can you manage the lead wrist into the follow through in a way that helps you not only to manage contact, distance, and direction, but also helps you to really control the club face at impact and the low point and the contact point of your swing? In order to do that, knowing where to stop is an extremely valuable lesson that I could teach you in the golf swing. It's one that I use most of the time with new golfers. I'll teach them how to finish the swing first, because if you know where to get to, you have a pretty decent chance, or at least a much better chance of getting there than if the follow through is just a moment in time that happens to you. So we're going to choose how to finish the swing here, specifically referring to this lead wrist. We know that we have more flex in the lead wrist at impact than we did at setup. I've already mentioned that. What I want you to do is to take this forward shaft lean condition and this flexed condition of the lead wrist. There's 10 degrees of flex, okay? Hold that feel, just like we did from the top, where I showed you how to keep the flex in the wrist from the top of the swing as you move down. We're going to take this 7, 8, 9, 10 degrees of lead wrist flexion and try to hold it into the follow through. There we go, 11, 12 degrees. So I managed to maintain the relationship there between the lead arm and the shaft, which effectively is controlling this lead wrist, and move my body up into the follow through without really changing that wrist angle. I wasn't letting the club get through the ball by releasing it or throwing it. Now that is happening to an extent in a full swing, but as I mentioned, if you want to control the wrist angles both at impact and into the follow through, meaning this club isn't flinging around, this club face isn't flinging around anywhere and everywhere, to establish some semblance of control, understand what this lead wrist feels like at impact. So we've got the handle forward, got some flex in the wrist. There's that 9 degrees, 8, 9 degrees. Keep it there, 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 keep it there. You teach yourself to move the body into the follow through and have the arms and club travel with you. Now, as you increase the speed, some of that wrist stability will be lost. And it's okay. No one's really keeping it exactly that stable forever. You'd have to swing extremely slowly to be able to maintain and manage those wrist angles. You're not going to be able to play golf if you go that slowly. Okay, you're not going to be able to play golf. You need some speed. But understanding what this feels like at impact and stabilizing the wrist angles past impact and into the follow through has a tremendous benefit to how well you control contact, low point, and how well you control club face, which is shot direction. So the final checkpoint for your wrists in the full swing would be to try to feel like your lead wrist stays as flat as it was at impact and keep it as flat as that into the follow through. Once the golfer gets to this point in time in the follow through and the swing, what happens here is really just a rehinging of the wrists, a radial deviation upwards to start slowing the club down, and then the arms will also flex right at the end to continue and complete that slowing down of the club. The follow through's job is to manage the radius of the swing first and foremost, and then to slow the club down safely by rehinging the wrists upwards and bending the arms to complete the swing. But the arms don't bend until the club is parallel, or the arms and club are parallel to the ground. This is the maximum point of extension in the golf swing. It's the point in time in the follow through where the arms are the straightest and the club is furthest from me. The club head is furthest from me. Now I'm going to rehinge my wrists and bend my arms. Most of you don't need to think about that last piece too much, because what's happening down here at impact and just post impact is already too chaotic for you to even worry about what goes on up here. So once again, just to finish, lead wrist flexed at impact, keep the same feeling of the flex up to this point in time. If you can hit relatively close to full shots with this short finish, that's really going to be a great way for you to train good lead wrist mechanics throughout the swing. There are some checkpoints for you in the backswing where the shaft's parallel to the ground, at the top of the swing where you finish the backswing, how to move the club in the early transition, where that lead wrist should be at impact, and how that should feel moving into the follow through. Those checkpoints are things that you can feel and try for yourself without any training aids, but I would highly encourage you to seek out a HackMotion wrist sensor if you really want to understand and measure what's going on at the wrist level. If you'd like to educate yourself further on more wrist condition videos, help you improve your golf swing and your understanding of how the wrists work further, go ahead and click the link down in the description of this video, which will take you to further videos that will enhance your education and help you play better golf.